What's up guys, and welcome back to another eBay miniature rescue. This week I'll be painting up this Lord of Plagues. So these models generally go for pretty cheap on eBay because there's a very large supply. So I paid $13 with free shipping, and the cheapest price I found otherwise for a non-painted miniature was about $15. So I saved a little bit, but this is a really fun model to paint. So starting with Vallejo Surface Primer Black, I'm just going to cover everything. Using Vallejo's White Surface Primer, I'm going to go pretty much from a top-down position, almost like a zenithal highlight, but we want to make the skin white so that we can do a shade and get some nice skin tones. Starting off with DEATHWORLD Forest, I'm going to mix this down into almost a glaze consistency. It's going to be pretty thin and transparent, and that's going to allow us to do multiple layers and still see some of that white and black transition underneath. So those darker areas are going to stay darker. So you can see after, a couple of thin layers, how that color builds up. And as long as I'm keeping it in those brighter areas and on top, then we can push the color and the pigment into where we want it to shine the most. Using Elysian Green, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. It's still going to remain very thin and transparent, but I'm going to do broad, almost edge highlighting here, just in larger areas. I'm also just going to put a little bit of variation into some of the areas that would just make for interesting transitions and cooler looking armor. Using OGRYN CAMO, it's going to be kind of the same thing as the other two, only the edge highlighting is going to be much thinner and actually on the edge. I'm still going to use this on some of the armor to bring out those highlights, but for the most part, it's just edge highlighting. So now that we've got a nice base coat down for our armor, we're going to move on and hit the skin, starting with Reikland Flesh Shade. While that wash is drying, I'm going to come in with rhinox hide on the axe and all of the chainmail. MOURNFANG brown for the weapon handle and the leather straps. MENOTH white base for the skulls hanging off of him and the main horn from his helmet. So using a fairly watered down Druchii Violet, I'm going to go over some of the skin where, you know, the straps are kind of tight and buried in him a little, and some of the more bruised areas. This is just going to give us a light skin variation, and if we use it several times after, you know, a layer dries and you go back, it's going to get darker, but this will make it so it's not going to be too purple right out of the pot. A Screamer Pink base coat for the guts and sores. Moot Green for the intestine goo. Screaming Bell for the marks of Nurgle. Using Agrax Earthshade with just a little bit of water in the brush, not too much. I'm going to go over pretty much everything except for the skin. Using SKRAG Brown, I'm going to highlight the leather and the straps. Kislet flesh over that SKRAG Brown, just stippled on with a really small brush, is going to create that damaged leather effect. Using a little bit of AVERLAND Sunset, I'm going to layer over the boil on his stomach, and then I'm going to come in kind of from the bottom up on the moot green goo coming out of his stomach and just quickly highlight that center section. With a very watered down SKRAG brown, I'm just going to go into some of the armor damage and other places around the model to give that impression that it's kind of rusting and just leaking out of those holes. The same thing with that SKRAG brown. We're going to use NIHILAKH oxide pretty much straight out of the pot. This stuff's pretty thin, so it flows nicely. Go over that SKRAG brown a little bit, kind of mix it into those holes, have it drip out a little bit just to sell that rust effect a little bit more.
Buildings topple, people panic, our sanity withdrew.
With a dry brush of Radiant Platinum, I'm just going to hit all of the metallics. Using SERAPHIM Sepia, I'm going to wash the 3 spikes coming out of his shoulder. I'm going to start kind of in the middle and just work my way down, pulling that wash into those recesses that separate that color. And then I'm going to wait for that to dry just a little bit and then start higher up and then do the same thing, pull it down toward the bottom. And that'll give it a little bit of a nicer gradient. Using Pallid Witch Flesh, I'm going to edge highlight around all of the sores on the skin. With a little bit of Blood for the Blood God, I'm going to hit the guts and some of the sores. With SKRAG Brown and Fire Dragon Bright, one before the other, and a sponge, I'm going to weather the main axe just a little bit more. So we already base coated it with Rhinox hide, and then I put the NIHILAKH oxide in a lot of those holes. So coming back with the SKRAG Brown is going to give it that nice rust, and then the Fire Dragon Bright is going to take that one step further. Then coming back with Radiant Platinum, still using the sponge, I'm going to sharpen that edge blade just by pulling it back along the edge, and then kind of do like a pseudo dry brush over some of the other areas just to let some of that metal show through the rust. Bringing back NIHILAKH oxide, we're going to do another layer of it in some of the larger holes on the axe. That's going to give it kind of a layered look, where there's rust with patina underneath, and then we're just going to go on top of some of the sharper areas. So what I like to do is put it on and then wipe it off with my finger. It leaves a little bit of a streak, and because it's got that kind of grainy texture, it leaves just what's dried underneath the top layer and kind of messes it up, and it looks a lot more like rust.
And turn our back on our tools.
I'm going to put some Escorpina green into the airbrush, and I'm just going to highlight the top of his helmet. This is going to be pretty light, but it's going to give a nice gradient where, it goes from the dark to the light, and you can see those lighter lines right in the middle that we painted earlier. I'm also going to use this on the base from a top-down spray to just highlight those rocks with a little bit of that kind of muted green. Then, with burnt umber, I'm just going to finish off the tips of those 3 spikes coming out of his shoulder. I think this is a good time to talk about when you can use your airbrush. A lot of people say, oh, I only use it for base coating or doing, one large thing. But at any point, you can bring your airbrush out and do a small detail. Even if you're not comfortable with it, you're probably going to get a really nice result just for trying. And if you're worried about overspray, then you can mask things off, you can put a shield up. A lot of the times you can just move it in a certain place and you'll be just fine. So don't be afraid to use that airbrush. So I decided after I finished painting this model that I was going to actually just put this one back on eBay because I already have Lord of Plagues. But what I thought would be kind of cool is to tell you guys about it, to give you an opportunity to take a look if you want to support this channel in a different way. I'm going to be starting the auction at the same price that I bought this model for. So if you're interested, the link for the auction will be in the description below. Thank you for joining me on another eBay miniature rescue. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Check us out on facebook.com/eBay miniature rescues and join in on some hobby conversation and share some photos of your minis. Thanks again. I'm Casey, and I will see you in the next video.